Hello and welcome back, my fellow Lovecraftians. The long-awaited part 5 of the Dunwich horror. How are you guys doing tonight? Are you terrified? Can't rest? Looking for a way to ease the horrors of the mundane? Well, you've come to the right place. Today, I will be reading the chapter 7, and we left off with the professors going to Dunwich. So let us continue. Friday morning in Armitage, Rice and Morgan set out by motor for Dunwich, arriving at the village about 1 in the afternoon. The day was pleasant, but even in the brightest sunlight, a kind of quiet dread importance seemed to hover about the strangely doomed hills and the deep, shadowy ravines of a stricken region. Now and then, on some mountaintop, a gaunt circle of stones could be glimpsed against the sky. From the air, a hushed fright. At Osborne's store, they knew something hideous had happened, and soon learned of the annihilation of the Elmer Fry's house and family. Throughout the afternoon, they rode around Dunwich, questioning the natives concerning all that had occurred, and seeing for themselves, with rising pangs of horror, the terrified ruins, with the lingering traces of tarry stickiness and the blasphemous tracks in the friar yard, the wounded Seth Bishop's cattle, and the enormous swaths of disturbed vegetation in various places. The trail up and down Sunday Hill seemed to Armitage of almost charismatic significance, and he looked long at the sinister altar-like stone on the summit. At length, the visitors apprised of a party of state police, which had come from Albury in the morning in response to the first telephone reports of the Friar tragedy, decided to seek over and out to the officers and compare notes as far as practicable. This, however, they found more easily planned than performed, since no sign of the party could be found in any direction. There had been 5 of them in a car, but now the car stood empty. Near the ruins in the friar yard, the natives, all whom talked with the policeman, seemed at first as perplexed as Armitage and his companions. Then old Sam Hutchins thought of something and turned pale, nudging Fred Farr and pointing to the dank, deep hollow that yawned close by. "God," he gasped, "I tell them not to go down in the glen. And I never thought nobody'd do it with the tracks and the smell of the whippet-pools a-screeching down there in dark noon to say." A cold shudder ran through the natives and visitors alike. Every ear seemed strained, and a kind of instinctive unconsciousness. Listening, Armitage, now that he had actually come upon the horror and the monstrosity's work, trembled with the responsibility he felt to be his. Night would soon fall, and then that would be mountainous blasphemy lumbered upon its eldritch chorus. Nicont perdidis in tremens. The old librarian rehearsed the formula he had memorized and clutched the paper containing the alternative one he had not memorized. He saw the electric flashlight was in working order. Rice beside him took from a vials a metal sprayer of the sort used in combating insects, whilst Morgan uncased the big game rifle on which he relied despite his colleague's warning that no matter what weapon or material would help. Armitage, having read the hideous diary, knew painfully well what kind of manifestation to accept and expect. But he did not add to the fright of the Dunwich people by giving any hints or clues. He hoped that it might be conquered without any revelation to the world of the monstrous thing that had escaped. As the shadows gathered, the native commenced to disperse homewards, anxious to bar themselves indoors, despite the present evidence that all human locks and bolts were useless. Before a force that could bend trees and crush houses when it chose, they shook their heads at the visitors' plan to stand guard at the friar ruins near the glen, and as they left, had little expectancy of ever seeing the watchers again. There were rumblings under the hills at night, and the whippoorwills piped threateningly. Once in a while, a wind sweeping up out of the Cold Springs Glen would bring a torch of infernal factor to the heavy night air. Such a fetor and all three of the watchers had smelled once before, when they stood above a dying thing that had passed for 15 years and a half as a human being. But the look for terror did not appear. Whatever was down there in the glen was biding its time, and Armitage told his colleagues it would be suicidal to try to attack it in the dark. Morning came wildly, and the night sound ceased. It was a gray, bleak day, with now and then a drizzle of rain, and heavier clouds seemed to be piling themselves up beyond the hills to the northwest. The men from Arkham were undecided what to do, seeking shelter from the increasing rainfall beneath one of the few undestroyed fire outbuildings. They debated the wisdom of waiting, or of taking the aggressive and going down into the glen in quest of their nameless, monstrous quarry. The downpour waxed in heaviness, and distant peals of thunder sounded from far horizons. Sheet lightning shimmered, and then a forky bolt flashed near at hand, as if descending into the accursed glen itself. The sky grew very dark, and the watchers hoped that the storm would prove a short, sharp one, followed by clear weather. It was still gruesomely dark, when not much over an hour later, a confused babble of voices sounded down the road. Another moment brought to view a frightened group of more than a dozen men, running, shouting, and even whimpering hysterically. Someone in the lead began sobbing out words, and the Arkham men stirred violently when those words developed a coherent form. "Oh my God. Oh my God," the voice choked out. "It's going again at this time by day. It out and out of the moving in this very minute, and the Lord knows what is going to be all up upon us." The speaker panted into silence, but another took up his message. "Niall Housen said Watley been heard on the phone ringing, and it's Miss Gurney, George's wife that lives down by the junction. She said they hired boy Luther and about driving the cows from the storm in the big bowl when they seen the trees abandoned in the mountains glen opposite side her, and it smelled no say else. It smells awful. It smelled like when they found the big tracks the Monday morning out. She said he's been with swishing, laughing sounds more and more, and waiting towards the trees and bushes could make it. All of a sudden, the trees along the road and the turned and pushed to one side, and there's no awful stomping and splashing in the mud. But here Luther, he seen nothing, only could bend it in trees and underbush there for her head. Bishop's Brooks going under the road. He hears it all creaking and straining on the bridge, and he spent. He could tell the sound of old water cracking and spitting in all the while. So never seen a thing, only such trees and the bushes are bended, and when the swishing and the sounds and they got the furrow on the roads. Wizard Watley's in the Sentinel Hill. Luther, he had the guts to step up on it, and he heard it first, and he was the ground and the mud and the water and the sky is the dark and the rain and the whipping and all the tracks about as fast as it could be. The beginning on the glens about the work the trees had moved, they all the same, the awful prints big as the Harrells by Sea Monday. At this point, the first excited speaker interrupted. "But that ain't the trouble now. By the start, Zeb here was calling the folks, and everybody was listening, and whether a call from said Bishop's cut, he's a housekeeper, Sally, was crying on out of fit of kill. She just sent the trees abandoned, besides the road, and it was a kind of mushy sound like a elephant puffing on a tread in the head of the house. There she spoke aside of the theater, the smell of her boy. Chauncey was a-screaming a howl now. He smelt up upon the Watley's remains Monday morning, and the dogs were all barking and whining awful. And she sent out a terrible yell, and says the shed down over the road just caved in, and the storm had blown it over, only the wind wasn't strong enough to do that. Everybody was listening, and all we could hear was lots of folks on the water gasping, listening as we could hear them. All to once, Sally, she yelled, as if to say the front yard picket fence. He just crumbled up, though there wasn't no sign of what done it. Then everybody on the line could hear Chauncey and old Seth Bishop yelling anew, and Sally was shrieking about something heavy had struck her house. Not lightning or nothing, but something heavy against the front. They kept it launching itself again and again, though you could see nothing about the front windows, and then, lines of fright deepened on every face, and Armitage, shaken as he was, had barely poised enough to prompt the speaker. And And then Sally, she yelled, "Oh, help! The house is caving in! Oh, the water! Yeah, you could hear some terrible crashing in the hollow full to scream." Just like that, when Elmer Fryer's place was took, only was. The man paused, and another of the crowd spoke. "That's all. Not a sound nor a squeak over there. Phones aren't like that, just as they like that. We have heard it all about the Fords and the wagons, and rounded up an able-bodied menfolks as we could get at a Cordy's place, and coming up there to Tearsay, you would have thought best, or do, not but what I was a taken in the Lord's judgment for our iniquities, but no mortal can ever set aside." Armitage saw that the time for positive action had come. Spoke decisively and decisively to the faltering group and frightened rustics. "We must follow it, boys." He made his voice reassuring as possible. "I believe there's a chance of putting it out of business. You men know that those Watleys were wizards. Well, this thing is a thing of wizardry. It must be put down by the same means. I've seen Wilbur Whatley's diary and read some of the strange old books he used to read, and I think I know the right kind of spell to recite to make the thing fade away. Of course, one can't be sure, but we can always take a chance. It's invisible, I knew it would be, but there's a powder in this long-distance sprayer that might make it show up for a second. Later on we'll try it. It's a frightful thing to have alive, but it isn't as bad as what Wilbur would have let it if he lived longer. You'll never know what the world has escaped. Now, we've only this one thing to fight, and it can't multiply. It can, though, do a lot of harm, so we mustn't hesitate to rid the community of it. We must follow it, and the way to begin is to go to the place that has just been wrecked. Let somebody lead the way. I don't know your roads very well, but I have an idea that might be a shorter cut across lots. How about it?" The men shuffled about a moment, and then Earl Sawyer spoke softly, pointing with a grimy finger through the steadily lessening rain. "I guess you can get to Seth Bishop's quickest by cutting across the lower meadow here, wading the brook at the low place, and climbing through Carrier's Moor and the timber lot beyond. That comes a crossing up the road. Nightly might Seth's a leader total left side." Armitage with Bryce and Morgan started to walk in the direction indicated, and most of the natives followed slowly. The sky was growing lighter, and there were signs that the storm has worn itself away, when Armitage inadvertently took a wrong direction. Joe Osborne warned him and walked ahead to show the right one. Courage and confidence were mounting, though. The twilight of almost perpendicular wooded hill which lay towards the end of their shortcut, and amongst whose fantastic ancient trees had to scramble as if up a ladder, put these qualities to a severe test. At length they emerged on a muddy road to find the sun coming out. They were a little beyond the Seth Bishop's place, but bent trees and hideous, unmistakable tracks showed what had passed by. Only a few moments were consumed in surveying the rooms just about the bed. It was a fire incident all over again, and nothing dead or living was found in either of the collapsed shells which had been the bishop's house and barn. No one cared to remain there amidst the stench and tarry stickiness, but all turned instinctively to the line of horrible prints leading on towards the wrecked Watley's farmhouse and the altar-crowned slope of Sentiate Hill. As the men passed the sight of Wilbur Whatley's abode, they shuddered visibly, and they seemed to mix hesitancy with their zeal. It was no joke, tracking down something as big as a house that one could not see, but that had all the vicious malevolencies of a demon. Opposite the base of Sentiate Hill, the tracks left along the road were broad swath markings of the monster's former route to and from the summit.
Artemis produced a pocket telescope of considerable power and scanned the steep green side of the hill. Then he handed the instrument to Morgan, whose sight was keener. After a moment of gazing, Morgan cried out sharply, passing the glass to Earl Sawyer and indicating a certain spot on the slope with his finger. Sawyer, a clumsy as a non-user of optical devices, fumbled a while, but eventually focused the lens with Armitage age. And then, when he did so, his cry was less restrained than Morgan's had been. "God almighty! The gas and bushes that are moving! It's going up slow like a creeping arter on the top of the mountain, and heavens only knows what for." Then, the German panic seemed to spread among the seekers. It was one thing to chase the nameless entity, but quite another to find it. Spells might be all right, but suppose they weren't. Voices began questioning Armitage about what he knew of the thing, and no reply seemed quite to satisfy. Everyone seemed to feel himself in close proximity to phase of nature and of being utterly forbidden, and wholly outside the same experience of mankind. Such concludes our reading for today. What did you think about the unseen Dunwich monster? I personally am excited to see when they spray it with that fine powder to see what it looks like. Another thing that has me on the edge of my seat is the fact that the Bishops and the Sawyers were the ones that were attacked. Two people that were against the Watleys. Does this monster have a personal vendetta? Does it have motives? Or is it just a demon and thinks by itself functioning? Or is it more thoughtful than that? I guess we'll have to tune in next time to find out, as we only have 20 more pages of the Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, my Lovecraftians, goodbye.